reciprocity. We give you something, you give us something. But I think reform of the global governance is important. And the final point is, given priorities, given culture, given history, we need to build common ground and we need to dialogue. And this is maybe what we can do a little bit at this conference. I think it'll go on after that. We're not going to solve the problems here, but maybe we can get a mindset or a discussion going that decision makers who go away from here will have learned something. And I think this is very important that we take also concern of other cultures and histories and learn more about each other. I think this is also very important, not only at the elite, but also at the level down. So I think cooperation, how? Reciprocity. Governance, difficult, but we need to do it. We need the WTO. I think we should not abandon it. It's a big debate. And we need to have this common ground and dialogue, which Jörg and I are trying to contribute here with the ESMT. So those are my thoughts on where we're going. Last year was about pretty much fragmentation. This year we want to turn it around into a positive story and say, let's build common ground. Let's see how we can actually move forward and solve. Not that the world has become any easier than 1 year ago, if you look at these things. And I think that we should avoid these independence traps. I think we need independence, but we're still together in the same boat, and we should not go too far in that direction. And nationalism, I think that would be a disaster. And I think there's no better place to discuss these kinds of issues than the BGD, the Global Forum on Decision Makers. So let me welcome you again. Let's make those 2.5 days a success. The weather is turning bad, but we are inside, so this is okay. There won't be anything happening here, and I wish you much success. I'm very much looking forward now to the next session, exactly on the issue of the role of business in the geopolitical world. I'm very happy to welcome you again. Thank you. Enjoy the dialogue. And I want to now, after you give me maybe a hand of applause, I will now, thank you. I will now turn it over to distinguished Francis Lacroix, who will introduce the first speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. The global business landscape is certainly rapidly changing. I mean, that's probably the understatement of the year. As open markets and trade faces challenges, supply chains are definitely shifting, and the international multilateral system is probably being challenged. So over the next 30 minutes, we'll try and explore some of the implications of this globalized but very fragmented world, what it means for business. And this comes again as global supply chains are probably realigning through geopolitical neutral economies to maybe build resilience. So it's my great pleasure to have here with me on stage Oliver Bäte, Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board of Management, Allianz, and Larry Fink, Chairman and Chief Executive of BlackRock. Gentlemen, thank you. Now, our governments, are governments now prioritizing national security objectives over economic efficiencies, Larry?
Are they?
Are they?
Look, I think everything's evolving. Obviously, national security is becoming a more prominent conversation, especially as the whole concept of nationalism and populism. I think people are focusing on that. But I don't think that's in lieu of economic growth. I think they go hand in hand. And so I don't look at that as either or. I look at that as a combination. I think that's just a process in which, but there's no question, national security is a more dominant part of the conversation. When you talk about energy security today, that's a very good example. Last year we did talk about fragmentation, and this year is really, I believe the major theme is talking about greater pragmatism. And a greater pragmatism, how do you create global growth? How do you create domestic growth? It has to be a more pragmatic approach. We're not going to be able to grow our economy through tax decreases or tax increases. It is about finding and working with the private sector to build more opportunities, more jobs. And to me, this is more about pragmatism, and I think that should be the dominant conversation today, focusing on how to build a better economic future for more of our world population. And in each country has to focus on how do they develop the essence for growth and opportunity. And I think this is, the major theme that I've witnessed, this new economic pragmatism.
Oliver, I guess if you look at, the U.S.-China trade war, it permeates through everything, especially the global economy. How do you see that developing? And again, what does it mean for business trying to operate in this environment?
Do we have a trade war?
Do we?
Yeah, that's the question. I'm not so sure. I think American and Chinese businesses have been never doing more trade, really, if you look at it. And we do also have that. It's really interesting that we read a lot of things, but the realities between businesses look very different. So I would not deny that there's strong competition. And as we heard from Henrik before, we need to be a bit smarter on how we have an inclusive economic model that doesn't say my gain is your loss. And I think that's unfortunately a little bit the political debate, but business people are trying to help by saying it's never worked. Pareto optimism has never worked. If one guy wins, the other one loses. Nobody will win.
But when you speak to governments, they definitely say some of the trade is being redesigned with friendly allies. Do you see that in business?
Absolutely, because we come out of 30 years where the world was supposedly flat, and we're very naive, particularly in this country, right? We don't need defense because Larry's colleagues will pay for it. We can spend, half of our budget on Social Security. We can invite everybody in. It worked for a while until it doesn't. So we have to just rethink what are the business models that will function. When you have in Europe, just take the EU 27, you have about 8% of the world's population, 16%, about 15-16% of GDP, but 50% of global security spending. Social security spending, unfortunately, not security spending. Do you think that's sustainable? No, it isn't. And we've known that for a long time, and now we have a little bit of a simultaneous shock out of 4 or 5 different directions that need to force us to rethink of some of these fundamentals. But it's required, and people are getting back to it.
Are we halfway there in terms of this redrawing of supply chains, or was it already started in the last 5-6 years?
No, I think what we witnessed because of COVID is a breakdown of these efficient supply chains, and we are now creating a more pragmatic approach to supply chain navigation. I think the buzzword today is more resiliency, and more resiliency meaning having more capabilities of more supply chains and more destinations. So that's just redrawing what globalization is. It's not an either or, as Oliver suggested. We're reimagining the supply chains, and let's be clear. At the same time, we're developing technologies that require different inputs, and the technologies also allow us to bring an onshoring process to more and more different goods. That's not bad or good. It's just taking advantage of technological changes and evolving through that mechanism.
But the U.S. was one of the main beneficiaries of this onshoring program. Does this continue, or is that it?
Well, I wouldn't call it a beneficiary or anything. I think most of it has been nearshoring. A lot of it is in Mexico. And so, I don't look at this as a either or. I look at this as just an evolution. And I think this is going to continue to do that. I think as we navigate more towards more and more AI, we're going to have the whole issue around protectionism of data. Where will that be populated and situated? So all of this is being evolving, and I don't look at this as bad or good. I look at this as an opportunity. And I think there's too much debate about winners and losers, and to me it's all about creating a more and more economic opportunity for more.
Francine, let me just add to what Larry, because it's very important. If we were to price properly carbon, a lot of the so-called supply chains that were so efficient have never been efficient, because we basically polluted the world by shipping things to Southeast Asia, North Asia, and then shipping them back, even though they should be produced much closer to our shore. So it actually makes sense to redesign value chains if we want to really address climate change. So a lot of the pressures that are coming, and by the way, we've done this for hundreds of years. We've done this for hundreds of years. So the issue that we are facing that overwhelms society is that so many changes are happening exactly at the same time.
change.
Yeah, and people having change fatigue, and that's why you see polarization, because people are overpowered, they want a simple solution, and they get it from the wrong sides.
Change trade, geopolitics,
technology,
AI.
Societal structure, over-aging, and particularly in the West and the mature. So there's many, many things that are happening at the same time.
So what does it mean for a company like Allianz?
The first and foremost thing that we need to look at, that there will be a lot more risky than it used to be. And the promise that we have for our clients, for our shareholders and our people is we need to be resilient, going back to what Larry has said. The second one is optionality. We used to have a simple way to do strategy, which was basically trend extrapolation and says there's a little bit of tech here, a little bit of more growth there, but it was very easy. Today you have to really think about extreme scenarios. And the third one is very basic. You have to go back to how do you win? And that is by offering the best things that consumers, our people and society can imagine. We have become a lot too self-confident, particularly some of this country, and assuming success will always be there. So we have to be on our toes, if I may.
But I would also say we're diffusing risk more and more. I think as we grow our global capital markets, we're diffusing risk. As more and more assets trade on the capital markets, less in a banking system, we're diffusing risk because, let's say, private credit. Private credit, in most cases, is matching $1 of assets to $1 of liabilities. It's not leveraged, so that's diffusing risk. But more importantly, I think the big wake-up call for the world, in my opinion, is the strength of the United States has been so much created by its large capital markets. And I think the conversations I'm having with more governments, including from Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom, India, Japan, is how do we expand our capital markets? How do we build them? How do we have a strong banking system alongside a strong capital market system? And I think that creates more resilience, and importantly, it diffuses risk. And I think we underappreciate the diffusion of risk as we expand the capital markets. I'm asked all the time, why isn't the market focusing on these, the Ukraine and Gaza and Lebanon and Israel? Why aren't we focusing on all these issues? Well, the market is focusing on these issues, but because of the diffusion of risk, we have not seen what we would normally see, let's say, a spike up in oil prices. We are actually seeing, through this diffusion of risk with the expansion of the capital market, a moderation that is underappreciated. And I think this is one of the reasons why I think more and more economies, especially Europe, needs to have a common union, expanding its capital markets and having a union of banking too. And I think it's going to be important. As I said, as I speak to more and more rising economies, they want to replicate the capital markets. They have a more dynamic economy. And I think that's going to be the next step over the next 10, 20 years.
But is there appetite for that? We saw the Draghi report. I mean, in the report it says Europe needs 800 billion euros a year. Where do you find that money? What's the role of private capital and all of that?
Well, it's certainly clear that the public sector doesn't have the money. And so while I agree with Larry's destination, the way there will be very ugly. And we need to make sure that we have collaboration how we get there. I think hostility is not the answer, and many other comments to be made. The second thing is we need to also make sure we have light regulation, but the right one. We are in a world living where natural oligopolies emerge because of the scaling, when we all know oligopolies are not very good. So we're fighting always around how that is. And the third one, and we heard it from Mr. Röller, we need to bring in the future where the growth is. We need to bring in India, we need to bring in Southeast Asia, we need to have China at the table. It cannot all be led by Europe or the United States. It doesn't work, sorry.
I agree with that.
There's a little thing, Larry, called the U.S. elections coming up. Does the world,
really?
is there? Yeah. I think most of us have heard about it. I mean, is the world vastly different depending on who gets into the White House?
No, not really. I mean, I think on the margin, yes. But both candidates are talking about their version of how to grow the economy, how to expand, more and more people to rise to a middle class, to have a stable future. How that's executed may be a little bit different, but no. I mean, we see repeatedly every year, every 4 years when we have an election, everyone says it's going to have a dramatic change in the market. And over time, it doesn't. I know it's great for media to talk about it. I know it's great for everyone to focus on it. But the reality is the economies, the markets are way beyond one election, way beyond one action. I think we are able to respond and cope and build. And I think our job is to be responding to whoever is in office and work with that administration to build a better future.
But 100% tariffs on certain products, if President Trump were in charge, I mean, this is not the media. Are you not worried about, you know, some of the big tariffs that could come?
Look, I'm chiefly against tariffs. I'm much more of an open trade person. In some cases, tariffs can work if there is dumping by some countries. And let's see how and what is going to be truly implemented instead of what is being talked about.
Yeah, I mean, this must keep you up at night.
Yes, it does.
Well, no, it doesn't.
Yes, it does. I was just kidding. I was just kidding. So what Larry said is absolutely true. It's absolutely true. I'm more worried really about what we see in democracy, seeing the polarization, because we have leadership, including on the business side, that have lost touch with what happens to ordinary people. When you look in this country, how we've been running down our infrastructure, the quality of basic education, the explosive cost increases in healthcare because there is no deductibles and self-care, that worries me more than who sits in the White House, with all due respect.
Look, what I worry about is the breakdown of trust. We talk about populism and this polarization of opinion. I mean, I think dialogues like this here in Berlin, dialogues last week at the UN in New York, we need to have more conversations. We need to create a greater ability to create trust and relationships. I think the greatest, history books will talk about the greatest breakdown of trust was during COVID when we lacked that conversation. I think so much of the global outcomes was that breakdown in trust. When I think about the rise of social media, we see the breakdown in trust. Trust is not texting each other across the table. Trust is having conversations, having communication, having bondings together. And I think we are losing touch. And I think, to me, this is one of the greatest problems. And it's very hard for a business to respond to these issues. But we need, as all leaders, both political and business leaders, finding ways of rebuilding trust. And to me, this is one of the biggest issues that I have with the rise of populism and the anger that we are seeing with the rise of populism. We need to find ways of coming together to create a common ground to try to help more people build a more common, more prosperous future.
Oliver, why do you see this disconnect between, I guess, politicians, business leaders, and citizens?
I have no idea. I would volunteer to take another job if I knew. But seriously, I know that when we talk, for example, stuff you read on the news, and saying inflation is under control, and you have your average worker in Munich not finding an apartment that he or she can afford, having to queue up 3 weeks for getting a doctor appointment, which is one of the best healthcare systems in the world. In school, 30% of the hours don't take place because we can't find teachers. We have a very fundamental problem while we are talking about how to rescue the world. So this is why, if we lose the electorate, nobody will focus on climate change. Yeah, so the answer is really look at basic goods and make sure they function for the average person. It sounds very strange. I'm not a social democrat, but I'm really worried about the cohesion in society because we always talk. The second one, we have a leadership class, including the business side, that always talks about the great things they've done yesterday, right? Regardless of whether they actually matter to the average person. I was just in parts of former East Germany where we had election for the far right, and a part of my family says, Oliver, what I see on TV is exactly like we had it in the DDR. They always talk about the great things they've done yesterday, but I actually go to the shop and nothing works. So we really need to rebuild the connection between that. And Berlin is beautiful, but it's also a bit apart from where many normal people are.
So what's the role of business in all of this? In terms of capital deployment, in terms of, I mean, do you take a holistic view, Larry, of where you want money to go because of this disconnect?
Well, first of all the money that we manage, none of it's ours. Okay, so let's start there. We don't have a balance sheet. 100% of the money that we have is on behalf of savers worldwide. And so our job is to be listening to our clients, how they want to deploy their capital. Our job is to be a fiduciary for each and every client. And we have clients here in Europe who 100% want us to invest in more decarbonizing technology. We have other clients who want to invest in more hydrocarbons. And our job is to be responsive to their wishes because it's their money. And so our job is to be working with them. Our job is to inform them on where we think the best opportunities are. But the ultimate decision still rests on our clients. And that's something that is misunderstood. And that's a very big change than when versus a balance sheet of a bank or a balance sheet of the general account of an insurance company. This money is not ours. And so our job is to be guiding our clients where we believe the best opportunities are. But the final decision of all $10+ trillion that we are responsible for is to be working on behalf. And that may be that one client who lives in a rural community that gives us $1,000 a year. Our job is to be responding to them or working with a sovereign wealth fund who is looking for us to work with them.
But where do you see the opportunities? Infrastructure? AI?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. I mean, I would say there's more opportunity today than ever. And you mentioned too, Oliver.
Yeah, I totally agree. Whether that's in AI, but again, that's also a mentality point. And the first here in Germany, we talk about, we need to regulate it because it could be dangerous. In America, we'll talk about how do I innovate and create opportunity. So it's a mentality shift we really need. And the second one is there is more opportunity. I totally agree with Larry. If I was 30 years younger, I would go out and create my own company, because what you can do with large languages now in insurance, you have nothing seen before, because we can process unstructured data in a way that we've never done. So it's really cause for optimism, and it's something that we should also resonate. I just want to hit for that. It shouldn't come across as we're criticizing, by the way, politics. The business elite is part of the problem. Yeah? So we really need to look forward. And I want to go back to optionality. Some car companies in this country decided we want to go electric only. That was not very clever, as we learn now, because consumers don't want to be bossed around by politicians. They don't want to be bossed around by CEOs saying you're only driving electric cars.
Or pay for it.
Or whatever that is. So we need to really listen to the people and say, what do you want? What do you want to pay for? What do you need? And get back to what we were really good at, inventing things.
But what does that look like? Managing by consensus? Then you're no longer leading.
No, I think we are leading. I mean, I think that our job is to be anticipating our clients' wishes and wants. I mean, if you don't anticipate your clients' wants and wishes, you're going to be behind them, and you're going to be falling. I mean, today is our 25th anniversary as being a public firm. So, and today we're closing our GIP transaction. And our stock price is up over 10,000%. We outperformed the S&P by 20 times. And we did it by trying to anticipate our clients. And I actually believe for the next 20 years, there's even more opportunity than the first 25 years of our being a public firm. So as Oliver said, there is enormous opportunity, but that opportunity can only be attained if you're working with your clients, you're anticipating their needs, and you're focusing on the future, not the past, but helping them navigate this 20, 30, 40-year journey of retirement. It's not about the ups and downs in markets. It's not whether the Fed's going to tighten or ease or what's going to happen. It's about what is the best opportunity for them to invest safely and soundly so that they could have retirement with decency, dignity, and hope.
I'm intrigued by your business pitch. So if you were 30 years younger, you said you'd start a company. What insurance, and what would that look like? Then we'll see if Larry invests in it.
Very much like Allianz looks like today. A bit more digital at its heart, and it's coming. But I was more on a serious note. When you think about some of the core risks we have in this world, like how you really think about cyber insurance and how would it really work, it doesn't work like we've done it the last 200 years. There are many better ways to do it. And so there's a lot of innovation coming that would be very good for people. And I'll give you, we are growing really, really strongly, 3 or 4 times GDP. We're not doing as well as Larry has, but by the way, congratulations for another reason. Because he did a very courageous decision to buy BGI, and the stock went down for 2 years, and he was right because he was an entrepreneur and had to get. Very hard to do that, very hard to do. So that's actually even more remarkable, I think. Anyway, so
deserves another round of applause.
No, but I actually believe the cycle for insurance is a pretty good cycle, and I think where Allianz is today, it's probably a safe bet to say that this is going to be a long-term opportunity for the next 20, 30 years.
So you deal in risk. Where's risk, applause, where's risk being mispriced when you look at the markets? Is it our dealings with China?
Risk is always
worldwide?
at the risk of being mispriced. So markets are never perfect, at least for certain periods of time. And there are risks, and I don't want to get into a gloomy perspective. My personal point of view, for example, is always there where you don't look. So for example, when you look at spreads now for government debt, it's, in my opinion, not properly pricing the fundamental issue we have with public debt, not just in Europe, but in other countries. The market is not really looking at that. It has assumptions like, if one country into the south of Europe can pay, Germany will bail them out. I wish we could. So I'm really worried about tail risk in some of the bond markets in terms of how they're pricing, which, by the way, every risk is an opportunity. So we as investors think that's an opportunity if you properly price the risk. There's other so-called illiquid assets that hang out in lots of balance sheets that are not priced to market that we will see a little bit of a reckoning. On the other hand, there's a lot of mispriced stuff. For example, people have been selling real estate for 2 years now. For the smart people, it's time to buy. So I don't think there is a point around it's very risky and not risky. We just need to be very, very careful. And the other one is we need to really watch not just for what credit ratings are, but where liquidity traps may be. So the risks in the system today are probably less on mispricing risk as it looks like, but what happens when liquidity evaporates out of the system. Right. Sorry, I don't want to lecture, but I agree with that. I think we agree. No?
Yeah. What's the right way of dealing with China?
Oops.
I think I think we all have to reassess how we are dealing with China. I think because of China supporting Europeans' enemy in Russia. I mean, if I supported my client's enemy, I'd be fired. And look at it, China is one of the destinations for huge manufacturing. I had a good that was made in China this morning. I mean, there are so many things that are manufactured, and that's going to be fine. I mean, China does play a very large role in the global economy. At the same time, we have to reassess how are we dealing with countries or companies that are supporting our future. Ukraine is at our footsteps there, doorsteps there. And I'm surprised that there's not a larger questioning or demanding, you're supporting our enemy, and we're putting billions and billions of dollars at supporting the survival of Ukraine. And there should be a cost to that. And it's not a conversation that's being had here. And I truly believe we need to be thoughtful about how we work with every country. And I know it's hard to describe this and discuss this, but I think it's a valuable conversation to be had. And look, we have businesses in China. I'm sure everybody here has some businesses in China. We all have to reevaluate that, like we have to reevaluate a risk in liquidity traps and risk in everything. But that conversation is not being had enough here, that we have an existential problem here in Europe on our doorsteps. It's being supported, Russia's biggest supporter and fundamental supporter of the Russian economy is China. And that has to be at least discussed. And each country, each company has to reassess what that means. And I'm not here to make any judgments, but I don't believe there's been enough assessment.
But it's a tough conversation. It's a tough conversation because it's also difficult to decouple essentially from China.
Yeah, and so there's a long debate. I don't think we have the time now. We have always tides, dependencies, and then historical errors around assessment, right? Even in this country, we never would have thought that what happened and Vladimir Putin did, which is very funny because I became CEO, was announced just after Russia invaded Crimea. And then I remember our government saying, well, we have to give him a little bit. And I said, that sounds like Mr. Chamberlain when Hitler invaded the Czech Republic. So we have made a lot of mistakes, and we need to be sort of having the conversation at eye-to-eye level and says, as we're learning that we have made mistakes, how do we correct them? The problem is we're always trying to defend mistakes of the past because it's about honor and respect. We need to be very pragmatic, as we heard today, about how do we deal with the issues at hand.
And so in this, we're almost out of time, but what's your biggest piece of advice to chief executives that want to make a difference or want to have these difficult conversations? Is it speaking to politicians? Is it changing their business model?
No, be true to yourself every day. Don't sacrifice your principles. Making sure every day is a day where you're honoring your principles, your values. To me, that's the most fundamental thing. And and we need to make sure as a leader of each company that we are leading by example, so all the employees understand that you're leading by your principles, by your values every day. And if you do that, things will be fine. Don't worry about anything else.
Oliver?
What can I add? On a more serious note, expectations for companies have been rising, particularly in society. I was told when I went to university, it's only the shareholder return that matters, and then we created some additional things coming back. In this country, we've always had to worry about the balance in society with the workforce, and Allianz, for example, is one of the 25 most revered company on the world now in terms of workforce representation and respect. When I started as CEO, we had 17% of employee shareholders, now it's 75%, right? So you can do both. But the key thing is we need to have more impact on society on very basic things. And when you go back to the history of this country, large corporations were not just offering jobs and dividends, they were also helping to build and rebuild education, build the universities, and we have to do a lot more. We will have to do a lot more because apparently public administrations have a hard time doing it.
Thank you so much for a spirited conversation, Oliver Bäte and Larry Fink. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we now have a coffee break, about 30 minutes, and then we start with the sessions. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be back here at 10:30 for the next session, Globalization amid Fragmentation, the changing... No, it's Chartering the Course, Global Strategies for the Energy Transition. Please welcome our moderator, Elif Begi Zaparoli.
Thank you. Maybe we also welcome our panelists.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Berlin Global Dialogue and to our discussion on charting the course, global strategies for energy transition. We are all very proud that energy investment has been increasing. More than 50%, close to 60% of global energy investment has been in renewables. And we now have, again, more than 15% of energy consumption in renewables. So great progress that we've made as a world. But we still have a long way to go, potentially, to meet the Paris targets of 1.5 to 2. And today, with our panel and ahead of COP29, we would like to have a set-the-stage conversation around where are we in energy transition, what have we achieved, what else should we be doing. And we're very honored that we have representatives around the table here that reflect different parts of energy transition. So with that, maybe I start introducing our panelists. We've got Dr. Fatih Birol, Executive Director of International Energy Agency. And the fun fact, so if you were to ask any of the Gen AI, Perplexity, or ChatGPT type tools, leading voice in energy transition, Dr. Birol's name comes as the first one. So very happy to have you. Then we've got Markus Krebber, head of CEO of RWE, a really very courageous, bold CEO who's taken RWE to one of the biggest corporate transformations in energy transition that we've seen. And of course, with the implementation of growing green strategy, really groundbreaking in terms of what you've been doing with RWE. So very keen to hear your journey and how you're seeing it. Welcome, Markus. And then we've got Jennifer Morgan, State Secretary and Special Envoy in International Climate Action, and someone who's dedicated her career in climate, in sustainability, and of course very involved with the international and global dynamics of energy transition and different regions and what does it mean. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And we've got Nathalie Oosterlinck from JERA, which is the largest Japanese power generation company. Nathalie leads the renewables aspect of it. She's an executive managing director. And of course, because energy transition is a global phenomenon, it's very important that we do take a global perspective to it. And of course, there's a lot of discussions, from a European perspective. We're in Berlin, but would be wonderful to have, Nathalie, your views as to how it looks and experiences sitting, based in Japan from an Asia-Pacific perspective. So welcome. Thank you. So, Fatih, I would like to start with you. Of course, International Energy Agency publishes a lot of data regarding where we are from an energy perspective, investment, consumption, trends, technologies. You are also at the forefront of all of the international conversations, whether with sovereign actors or companies. You're really in the middle of a lot of international global diplomacy. So, and of course, we had the Climate Week in New York, a couple of days ago. You were both there. So where are we? If you were to set the stage for us, we've made progress, but where are we? If you were to almost grade us as a world, how would you grade us?
We are in Berlin. I am very happy to be in Berlin. First of all, I should say that thank you very much for hosting us, the German government. So thank you very much for organizing this meeting. Maybe I could say in the beginning two things, that the clean energy is moving fast and faster than many people realize, and I want to give a couple of numbers. And second, try to explain why it is moving fast. What is the driver of that? So we at the IEA, as you mentioned, we publish a lot of reports, maybe too many, or one per day, more or less, nowadays. And when we look at those numbers, I want to choose 3 of them to show you how strongly clean energy is moving. One, electricity generation. This is the biggest part of the energy sector. And every year around the world, in Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, everywhere, lots of new power plants are built. And when we look at them, this year, 85% of all new power plants built in the world are renewables. Alone, 85%. 5% nuclear, and 10% fossil fuels. So this is huge that the renewables, especially solar, is by far the #1 choice of governments around the world. Second, mobility. Electric cars are also going very strongly. 4 years ago, 1 out of 25 cars sold in the world was electric, 1 out of 25. And this year, more than 1 out of 5 cars sold is electric. And electric cars are becoming, first in China and soon somewhere else, cost competitive, the same price, with the traditional cars, the internal combustion engine cars. This is the second one. And third and the last data I want to give, which is for me the most telling one among all of them, which is money. We at the IEA look at all the investment the companies and governments are doing in the energy sector: oil, gas, pipelines, refineries, electricity, nuclear, solar, everything, the budget of the energy sector. 10 years ago, the entire budget of the energy sector was $2 trillion US. 1 trillion went for fossil fuels, 1 trillion for clean energy. And this year, the entire budget is $3 trillion US, and 2 trillion for clean energy, and 1 trillion still for fossil fuels. So the clean energy moved from 1 trillion to 2 trillion in 10 years, a double. It's a big jump there. So this shows that the money is also pouring. Now, I want to finish by saying what is behind that? What is driving the clean energy transition? To be honest with you, as many of us may think or may wish to think, it is not the climate change which drives that. The main driver of clean energy today is the industrial policy, because many governments understood, many business understood, the next chapter of the economy will rely on the clean energy manufacturing. It is the electric cars, it is the batteries, it is the solar panels, wind, and others. So this is the, for example, today, the #1 clean energy manufacturer is China, and for China, it is the industrial policy. It is not only the climate change. This is #1. #2 driver is the energy security. Today, renewables are the best friends of energy security. Nobody can get hostage of the solar and wind, no other country, if it is in your own country. And when we have seen what we see in Europe, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the renewables increased very strongly in Europe, and by taking a lot of measures, and congratulations to the German government by shortening the permitting times, and then as a response to energy security threats. And this is what we are seeing. And the third, the energy security, and the third one is, the third driver is the climate change. So energy security, industrial policy, and climate change are the main drivers of the clean energy transition, which is moving fast and faster than many of us realize.
Thank you very much, Fatih Bey. Markus, if we can turn to you, and in the earlier session we had this morning, you already shared some very interesting perspectives on, at the end of the day, what are the most important drivers and maybe even obstacles or elephants in the room, as you've cited. So from, again, a large corporate who's really believed and committed in transition and committed a lot of investment and the corporate identity of your company. How does it look? What does a very sophisticated, successful corporate journey look like?
Also from a corporate view, I can actually echo what Fatih said. I mean, also for a company, on company level, we have record level of renewable generation. We have record investment. For us, it's 100% clean technology. So we see also very strong demand for green energy. I don't find a customer who wants to buy 20 years of power, which is not clean. It needs to be 100% clean. So it's already obvious that the availability of green energy is a competitive advantage for certain countries. Now, when we look at the targets, we are unfortunately not nowhere near to reach the targets. So we need to also address the question, and that is where you are hinting, is what are the current challenges? So what do we need to overcome to be even more faster? And here I would like to highlight 3 things. So we always think as a corporate, where are the bottlenecks, where are the hurdles which we need to overcome? First thing is supply chain, the equipment we need. I think even the global manufacturing capacity of clean technology is not half of what we actually need to ensure that we reach the target. So we need to work together with the supply chain to ramp up capacity here. And since it's a global supply chain, it is affected by geopolitical tensions. So we have sometimes problems getting equipment in certain geographical areas. Second is coordination. We have focused a lot, I mean, also with certain governments to accelerate permitting and build more generation capacity. But now we have the limitations on the infrastructure, especially the electricity grid. We need massive investments in the grid. Otherwise, we find our renewable investments stranded. And in certain areas where we have very high penetration rates of renewables, the problem of intermittency needs to be addressed. So we need also a big push for storage and backup capacity. And the third one, where I don't have a solution, unfortunately, it's affordability. Because what changed over the last 5 years with inflationary environment and higher interest rates, the cost for renewable electricity have actually doubled. And that has become a problem for certain energy-intensive industries.
Thank you, Markus. Jennifer, why don't we keep up with one of the things that Markus said and something that IEA and Dr. Birol also talks a lot about, which is this concept of trade, right? This concept that when we talk about energy transition, it is a global phenomenon, it is an international phenomenon, but there are other considerations that go into that, like geopolitics. Mm-hmm. So given your experience, given where you sit, how do you think of the global coordination, the global trade, and some of those factors and sensitivities helping or potentially hindering the global energy transition that we're in, especially recently, right? Because maybe from a globalization, deglobalization perspective, we may have taken a slightly different turn over the last few years. I think it's fair to say, certainly since the pandemic, for various reasons.
I mean, there's different components of that. I think the first is the intensity of actually the impacts of climate change that are hitting now, and to bring that into our conversation as well, because that impacts supply chains. It increases cost to society. And often I think we have these conversations about energy transition, but we actually don't look at what the alternative is if we don't shift and the costs from that. And I think that has an impact also globally in terms of how countries are able to cope, the security implications that come from that, the increased conflict that comes from that, I think are all very important factors as well. The second is I really feel as if the geopolitics of energy is shifting beneath our feet. Mm-hmm. Because countries that never dreamt that they could be energy superpowers, and meet their own energy needs, first from renewable energy, are now seeing they can do that, but also they can be exporters. And so that is shifting because all of a sudden there's countries that see an opportunity in energy that they didn't formerly have. And of course, you have fossil fuel producing countries or exporting countries that all of a sudden are challenged by this and need to diversify their economies. And we do quite a lot of work. I think what it means is, from a German perspective, we have over 40 partnerships with countries on energy and climate because the markets are shifting. There's uncertainties. We know we're going to remain an import nation as we phase out, but also continue to import. And so those different factors, they bring uncertainty, but I actually see more opportunity, partially from what Fatih said, because the numbers are moving so quickly, because I think if you look east and west from here, if you look to China, if you look to the United States, you are seeing a pace and scale of change that I think means it is inevitable what's happening. The question is who diversifies most quickly from those export countries, what is the carbon intensity of their export, and whether or not we can work with the complexity that exists. I think when we talk about challenges, that's one that keeps me up a little bit at night, because we are working to do something unprecedented, shifting our energy system in a very short time period, because we waited too long, frankly, to really get serious about the climate crisis. And all the different pieces that need to move together when you are building new interests, but you still have vested interests that aren't quite ready to move yet. I think those are some of the key things we're working on.
Thank you, Jennifer. Staying in that global theme, Nathalie, will you give us the Asia-Pacific perspective, Japan and other places that JERA is present in? Because clearly different regions have different challenges, different opportunities, different priorities, different cost curves, right? How does it look from your perspective, from an Asia-Pacific perspective?
It's really interesting. I've been a part of, let's say, the energy transition for almost 20 years when the first offshore wind farms and renewables were built here in Europe. So I've lived a very Eurocentristic view, and I moved to Japan 3.5 years ago, and it kind of opened my eyes. To tell you a story, I have a map of the world in my office where Japan is at the center of the map, and I'd never seen a map of the world where Europe is not at the center. So it just it's something. I've taken the map with me. I've moved to London now, and the map is still in my office because I tell this story all the time. But it's really important because the energy transition and how it actually has worked and how Europe has led the way has been fantastic, and it's great, and it has brought a lot of economic growth to Europe and to European manufacturing and to European jobs, etc. But if you look at Asia, the situation is very, very different. If you take the example of Japan, Japan are islands. It's completely independent. There is no interconnection to any country whatsoever. It's completely dependent on import. Also, it has the history of what happened in Fukushima, and I have to explain that JERA was actually created in the slipstream of that event. So we have like 75 gigawatts of thermal power. There are not a lot of options to create an energy mix in Japan that is balanced when you're so dependent on import. And if you look at all of our activities globally and also in Asia, we have a lot of investments in countries like the Philippines, but also Taiwan. There's lots of geopolitical issues in the area, but also the cost of energy is still really important. There's the first priority there is to close a lot of the coal plants, maybe transition into gas, and then try and build as much renewables as we can. But the energy system in Asia is very different than the energy system we see in the US or in Europe. If you go to countries like India or you go to countries like the Philippines or Vietnam, you can see the problems and what we need to tackle in how to bring this forward very tangibly over there.
Thank you, Nathalie. This session is supposed to be interactive, so we're of course also inviting all of the audience and guests to ask questions. Please raise your hands. I know that we've got some young participants, and there were some questions that I'd like to ask on their behalf, which is about the transition energy sources. And I think, Markus, you're calling them the flex generation. So basically natural gas and nuclear. Can we have maybe, Fatih, start with you, the role of nuclear and natural gas in this transition, and Markus, yourself as well.
With pleasure, but since you said it's interactive, there is one word you use, Mrs. Zapoeli. This is, I think we will hear this in the energy debate, discussions, policy deliberations allowed, which is trade. I want to say a few words on that. Because now, I understand Asia is different, but not that different as well. Because today, when we talk about the clean energy, the champion by far is China, not Europe. Sorry for that. This is not, and China is the leading, and India is coming very quickly, especially in terms of solar. Now, when I look at around the world, China is definitely dominating the clean energy manufacturing and exporting, and will export. United States has its own program, the Inflation Reduction Act, giving a big boost to its domestic manufacturing, clean manufacturing capacity. And India has also production-linked incentives, a similar one like the IRA. What will happen is that among the countries, we are going to see more and more building trade barriers. So these trade barriers, they have a legitimate ground because countries would like to protect their own industries vis-à-vis others. There is a legitimate basis on that. But if not well designed, it may well lead to slowing down of the clean energy transition because the cost may go up. You don't choose the cheapest option. So therefore, it is very important to find the right balance, and you mentioned our publications. We are having a publication on this as well. Whatever topic you tell me, we have a publication. This one is coming on trade. And Jennifer mentioned the fossil fuel exporters, but our numbers will show that the trade of clean energy products may soon compare with the fossil fuel trade. So this is another trade coming there. So be careful. So this is one thing I wanted to say, the trade. You are completely right there. It's a nerve center of many problems, many issues now. Coming back to nuclear, now I'm in Germany, in Berlin, I underline this, but I still tell what I think. So I believe in the countries where it is accepted by the population, nuclear has a role to play. But the big chunk of the global energy mix will be still renewables, but nuclear has a role to play. And when I look at around the world today, nuclear is making a comeback for three ways. In some countries, nuclear power plants who are about to retire or retired, there will be lifetime extensions, such as in the United States, in Canada, in France, and in Japan. There will be restarts in Japan and Korea. This is one. Second is some countries are building their first nuclear power plants. In Europe, for example, Poland is a good example there. And third, new nuclear technology, small modular reactors are getting a lot of attention and also the interest there. And nuclear is making a comeback, not because of, again, it is climate benefits, but it is coming because of this energy security. People want to generate electricity at home. This is the thing. Of course, as all the technologies, nuclear has its own challenges. The biggest challenge is the financing. It requires a huge amount of money for the first down payment. This is one challenge. Second, nuclear industry has a very bad reputation. Most of them never finish the projects on time and on budget. There are always delays and cost overruns. And third, we have an issue of where we get the fuel, the uranium from. There is a need for diversification and the waste disposal there. So putting it all together, I see that nuclear is making a comeback in many countries, and whether or not this will turn to real projects and the big wave, as we have seen after the first oil crisis in 1970s, that the first fleet of nuclear power plants is something yet to be seen. But I see this movement around the world.
Markus, your perspective, again, I think flex generation is your terminology in terms of describing these transition ways of generation. And then, of course, your comments on trade, because as a global company, I know that you're very much in the middle of this conflict of, yes, there is an advantage of having it at home, but then there is the cost disadvantage potentially.
Yeah, I think that is that is exactly what Fatih said. What we face, we currently have a construction program of almost $8 billion in the US, and of course you think about potential measures after the election which would make it more difficult or more costly, and that already now slows things down because you don't want to be too exposed to new trade policies. And it's exactly that we need a framework where you find the right balance to bring jobs locally, because we clearly see that the acceptance for the energy transition by the people is much higher when they see the good jobs close to them. But also to avoid driving costs. On nuclear, you were very polite being in Berlin here. There's a very interesting discussion you have with American colleagues. When the Americans look at Europe as one country, they always say the generation mix looks very balanced. But when you look a bit deeper, you see that one country is 100% focused on nuclear, and next border, one is 100% exiting. So as Europe as a whole, it looks quite balanced. Coming to your flex generation point, first of all, I think we need to be clear that nuclear is not the best friend of renewables. Nuclear needs to run baseload. So we cannot ramp down and up nuclear plants because renewables produce. When you design a system of nuclear, renewables, and flexible generation, maybe nuclear does X%, and 100 minus X is done by renewables and flexible generation. Because otherwise the economics of nuclear will be destroyed. I think there are already discussions in France about exactly that economic phenomenon. And I think it's a political decision whether you go nuclear or not. You can still design a system without nuclear. But then you need backup capacity, and that depends especially on seasonal demand. In areas like California, batteries can do a big trick because, I mean, you typically have daily patterns. But at the East Coast in the US or in Europe, where you have very high demand in winter heating, you need more than just storage. You need a different backup capacity system. And here in Germany, we need to replace coal by gas with the clear vision to run it one day on hydrogen. Because without that, if we don't build it in parallel, we can never exit coal, which would, of course, be for a country like our home country here, I mean, a disaster.
Can I come in?
Yes, please.
So maybe on a couple of different points. So I think, first of all, on Asia, I mean, I spend quite a lot of time in Asia, and I think it is so diverse. I think the changes that are happening in China, China met its renewable energy goal 6 years early, 1,200 gigawatts of renewables. A large portion of the growth in China's economy right now is from these innovation technology areas. So I don't think that's going to slow down anytime soon. I think the biggest challenge there, and that's what we are working on here, is how you combine energy security, economic security, and climate security together. And you always have to bring that climate security piece in. It may be now that it's industrial policy, but if you don't think the climate security piece in, then you bank on nuclear, but nuclear is not going to help us by 2030. It's too expensive. It's all of the things you know, and the technologies aren't there yet. All of the risks, and then you also
except the lifetime extensions, of course.
The lifetime extensions, countries, we don't want to do that, but countries are choosing to do that. That's a risk. It's all a risk question, right? What populations are ready to accept. But I think the dynamism in Asia and what happens also in, again, the countries that are seeing the opportunities and are also vulnerable to climate impacts, where India goes, I see as fundamental. And Japan, I was there recently, I found it fascinating because a few years ago, they didn't have any renewables, right? Now I think it's around 10% or something like that, right?
Yes.
So to there, I think this comes in the trade and the energy security piece. My understanding is they're on the cusp of maybe patenting some new technologies in solar and in offshore wind, and then they're more independent from Chinese imports of those technologies. So we have to be thinking all of these things together. On nuclear, I think the pace and scale that's happening around renewables and grid, I wanted to bring the grid in the room because I think that is what I hear everywhere, is having a flexible grid, combining renewables with storage and that kind of a flexible grid. That's what we're working on with many countries around the world. And the nuclear piece, maybe some will come back, but the numbers just don't compare, Fatih. I mean, between what's happening on the renewable side of things. So I think you know, even if you think those three things together and you're looking at new nuclear power, my worry is more is that countries use climate as a reason, right, to build new nuclear. But we also know that if we don't have global emissions by 2030, we're not going to be in any shape. Also, the security implications.
You are right. I mean, building a new nuclear power plant takes several years. Solar panel for 2 years maximum. But I am talking about the lifetime extension of the existing nuclear power plants, which can be easily available. And but if you decide to build a nuclear power plant today, it will not be ready for 2030. I agree with you there.
And I think gas is, you know, that of course that's the big debate right now, right? We all agreed last year in Dubai to transition away from fossil fuels and to triple renewables and double efficiency. And I think when you have a 2045 binding climate neutrality goal, then you have to think that with as well. It's not an ever-ending kind of a resource. I just, you know, we have to bring climate into the room. I think often these energy discussions happen without really realizing what's happening around the world on the climate impacts, and we need to do that. And that has an impact, therefore, on how long fossil fuels. I mean, we know, IEA found no new fossil fuel installation should be installed, right?
Yeah, and also what you see is that growth goes hand in hand with industrial policy and also long-term vision. And then trying to make that work in combination, like policy setting happens in like 4 years at a time or 5 years at a time. The energy transition is a long-term thing. It's something you need to look over different governments that follow after each other. And it's really important, and what you see that really works in China is that the industrial policy is really the driver behind it. I think in Europe also we forgot that we were once a manufacturing nation and now we're not anymore. And with everything that happened with Ukraine, etc., and energy independence being so important, it becomes really important to think how do you match the industrial policy with actually the goals that we want to achieve, and also have like a vision on where are we going. And for each and every country and for each and every region, that will look very different because the energy mix looks very different in all of the regions, but at least having the vision. And it can be wrong or right in hindsight. Like 10 years ago, Germany took some decisions, and people can argue whether those were the right or the wrong decisions. But you can only look back, like the only way is forward, to look at the future, and putting that vision out there is really important.
Maybe picking up on this point of intergenerational versus the current political environment we're in, at least in democracies, that we have, you know, cycles which are much, much shorter. I think this was discussed at another of our venues. So there is this reality that energy transition is a long game, right? It does have to do with, you know, multiple generations, whereas in democracies, decision-making is shorter. 4 years, maybe in the US, when you bring in the Congress, you know, 2 years or so. And of course, you've got the China example out there where there isn't that, let's say, conflict potentially, but that's another discussion because there aren't, you know, maybe we don't want to give up democracy and, you know, the way of life from that perspective. How do we think of that? Is that a potential conflict? Is there a way of resolving it? Like, how do we think of that?
I think it's all about putting people at the center. If you put people at the center in your decision making, and you know you have that long-term vision of net zero, right? That's where we need to get in different time frames, but 2050, we all need to be there. And you know the road is going to be bumpy along the way with ups and downs. But if in your decision-making you put people at the center, you, when you're looking at doing shorter-term policies, which then you make sure that you're working with people to understand what their concerns are. You make sure that the most vulnerable populations in your countries aren't the ones that might be impacted by higher costs. You look also at how you can be shaping your policies also to make sure that the speed happens, because your citizens are very varied. I mean, look in Germany. We have youth who are desperate. They are very scared about the climate challenge, not the climate challenge, they're very scared about climate change. And then you have people who are very worried about higher costs, about things that are coming that they don't necessarily understand or don't want. And so by creating those types of dialogues, I think, and by spending extra time by putting people in the center of a just transition. So most recently I was in South Africa, which is going through a just energy transition with a new government of national unity, very impressive, but the process of how to get there, of putting people in the center, then looking at actually the policies of actually there. And once your renewables start happening, how do those benefits get shared? So that you're building constituencies as you go, and you're listening to them and giving and taking. And I think we've learned a lot over the last years, and that needs to be much more front and center.
I think it's a very important topic that we discuss the interaction between the political cycle, good policies and implementation. And here a lot has gone wrong. What I have observed is that to avoid immediate action in the last decades, we have always discussed long-term targets. Let's go for more aggressive climate protection targets. So, or let's exit nuclear like in Germany. But no good policy to implement anything. So on the nuclear side, the big mistake was actually that we haven't got any incentive to build anything to replace it in the last decade. Yeah? And I see that we fall into the same trap now that we see the challenges of the energy transition, and there is a big dream of new technology like fusion. Fusion might solve the problem of our later generations, but it's not going to contribute significantly by 2050, or a new build of nuclears. I mean, lifetime extension is something else, what is already there. But we need good policies, and I would like to focus the politicians not on long-term targets or directions, but what can be done to accelerate things in their term, in the next 4 years. Let's talk about permitting. Let's talk about global trade, of supply chain. Let's talk about coordination of grid and renewable builds out. And we should not discuss whether we achieve a target which is out in 2040 and all this long term. We need to discuss good policies. And here we have examples, and the IRA is one of them, which is well thought through, and we probably have, I mean, bipartisan support even for the IRA after the election, because it combines the different things. It gives an incentive to invest. It's very pragmatic, not overly micromanaged. It creates good jobs in the countries, and it brings down energy costs.
Yes.
Of course. So if I may, I mean, intergenerational issue, and of course, the democracies and the differences there. But there is one other issue that I want to underline, which is the rich countries versus the emerging countries. I mentioned that we are having this year 3 trillion of clean energy investment. This is very good. This is not in line to bring us to our climate targets, but it is not bad at all. But the bad news within that is the following: 85% of this 3 trillion is happening in the rich countries and China. 15% is happening only in the countries where you have more than 2/3 of the global population. So first, it is not just, as Jennifer was saying, in a national one and international one. And the second, it is also, it doesn't help anybody, because climate change is so that 1 ton of CO2, carbon dioxide, going to atmosphere from Jakarta or from Detroit or from Hanover or from Stockholm or Johannesburg, it has the same effect on everybody. So the emissions don't have a passport. So therefore, even for the rich countries' own interest, just for selfish interest, it is important that the emissions in the other countries should also go down. So from that angle, I see the problem is the following. We need to go to global solutions in a world where the fragmentation is getting more and more, how shall I say, serious. So this, I see, this is the fault line of our fight against climate change. Is not the choice of technology, but how we are going to finance the clean energy investment in developing countries in a world where everybody looks after himself or herself, and there's a fragmentation.
Yes. And who's the arbitrator of that global policy, right? I mean, that's the challenge of a global problem that actually doesn't have a global counterparty to address it with. So if we take that as given, right? If we take that there is fragmentation and, you know, we do have nation states and we are where we are, in terms of that developed, less developed division, that it is 85% and it's 15%, potentially reasons for that, Fatih, is financing. But how do you see, I mean, is that the reason, or are there other issues like regulation or energy security? Because maybe if we can sort of ask the proper question, then we can have the proper answer to it.
Yeah. I think the main reason is to summarize with 3 words, cost of capital in the emerging countries. If you want to build a solar panel in Africa, compared to Belgium, the cost is 4 times higher because of the risk of the money. Nobody wants to go there. How are we going to find ways to de-risk it? And I give you one number, which is very, I mean, if you didn't ask for this, but this is one of the, shows the inequalities in the world. If you ask me, choose one number. Let's think about the sub-Saharan Africa. First of all, every second person, 50% population have no electricity, number 1. Number 2, the biggest chunk of the solar radiation comes to Africa compared to no other continent in the world. Yet, the amount of solar electricity we generate, the Africans generate in the entire sub-Saharan Africa is less than the solar electricity generated in Belgium. Think about the map. How many people live there and how many people live in Belgium is a great country, I have no problem with it. But to show the how, I mean, it is really, and they don't have electricity. This is so simple. When you don't have electricity, the health system, school system, telecom, you don't have any of these things. So just to tell you the discrepancy there, which is real troubling.
And from a practical point of view, you're absolutely right, and I'm sure you will see the same. If we, with JERA Next, we look at global expansion and where you do projects, and you look at the whack of projects everywhere around the world, you will probably not end up in Africa. If you have $1 billion to spend as an investment, then you have other options of other countries that you go to first. But how to solve that, I think that's another question.
I think a couple of things. One is on the financing. This is the crux of it, and this is an issue where we may not have a global energy organization, but we do have the Paris Agreement. And within the Paris Agreement, every country next year has to put a new climate action plan on the table for 2035. In those climate action plans, that's where the policy should be coming, I totally agree, for the time period up to there so that you can be actually achieving that long-term goal. And so I think that's one area where we're working very actively to say, okay, how can you get that long, loud legal certainty that investors need to get those investments? But that won't be enough. So that's one of the issues, right? But how do we get those framework conditions in place? And we're seeing that in different countries that are working on just energy transition partnerships. When they have the framework conditions in place, the policies and measures, that's when the investment comes. But we know also that the cost of capital is so high. So one thing that Germany has been working on is I came back from the Africa Climate Summit listening to President Ruto, whose numbers were even higher than what you just mentioned of the difference to invest in Europe to Africa. I think he said 8 times more expensive, but either way, it's big. And we said, okay, what's the problem here? And so what we found from different institutions that are in the financial world is the issue of guarantees and the risks. So what we've started is a green guarantee group to bring together the different actors within the financial sector across the board to create a platform to say, how can we increase the use of guarantees in the different types of guarantees that are needed to bring down the risks where we can, so that we can be scaling up these, whether it be in Africa, which is a very big priority. We are part of the accelerated partnership for renewable energy in Africa with 7 countries that want to go 100% renewables in Africa. But that's what we, it's and right now they're underutilized. They're very much underutilized. So I think that's one piece of the puzzle. I think the framework is a piece of the puzzle. And I want to bring the other question is the skills and making sure that also countries have skilled workers to be able to implement the transition. And investing in that as well is a big priority. And that's, of course, the opportunity. That's why countries want to go more into renewables as well. They see the opportunities that are there in jobs.
I'll come to you, Markus. Before then, just one comment. So as Bank of America, we're very committed to sustainable finance. We have committed to invest $1.5 trillion by 2030, and we're already close to $600 billion. But this concept of guarantees is exactly what is disabling the leveraging of the private and the public money, which is we should be able to de-risk an investment, right? I mean, there needs to be a cost of capital risk chain where certain investors come depending on their risk appetites, their mandates, etc. Right now, there is no such mechanism. Therefore, when you go and try to do a project in Africa, you have to take on the entirety of the risk, whereas many institutions are not equipped for that, right? So that lack of standardization of guarantees in particular, and what's also interesting, Jennifer, is, of course, there could be a lot of bilateral lending, but I think, again, IEA has published the DFI volumes. They're not that large. I mean, they are not even $60 billion a year. So when you think of the amounts of money we need, bilateral lending isn't getting us there.
Great.
Somehow we need to leverage. And what is that leverage? You create the guarantee of the MDB, of the DFI, of whatever, maybe even single governments, and then bring in the public markets, the capital markets. But that standardization, Jennifer, if you guys could get there, I think there would be a lot of banks, being a part of that.
I think we need, for another part, we also need standardization, because for me, the global aspect has 2 elements. The one we discussed, I agree with everything what has been said on financing and guarantees for investments in certain countries. The other thing is, I strongly believe that we need a very economic, rational approach to the energy transition. We need to spend the money where we achieve the highest benefit of CO2 emission avoidance first, because that brings the cost down of fighting global climate change. And we have already achieved in certain countries levels of decarbonization where spending additional money on decarbonization is very expensive. We have some measures where we have implicit carbon abatement costs of 200, 300, 400, 500 euros per ton. If you put the same money in other parts of the world, we would probably save 10 to 20 times as much CO2. But what is missing is a global standard and also on carbon accounting. I mean, there were many trials and all these offset projects were compromised because compliance issues and so on. So besides the global financing, we also need a certified system of carbon accounting. And I mean, there is now the push for VERs, voluntary emission reduction certificates, but there we need a global body who has certificates these investments, that we allow some offsetting, because you would achieve a much higher effect globally than continuing investing in your home country.
That has huge equity implications, though, because many of those countries have their own targets and their own goals, and they want to transform their economies. So, so that if you have an offset mechanism where they implement a project and then export that credit, then they can't count it for their own reduction. And we do need the standards, and I think we're working very hard so that they can be very high quality standards, because we've seen since Kyoto we haven't really fixed the problems. And I think, and the German government is very much precautionary principle here, we want to get the standards at this upcoming COP. but looking at other financial mechanisms. I think if you look to Brazil, they're looking at a whole range of different mechanisms, what they can be doing through domestic resource mobilization, what is their own country platform, how their bank, BNDES, is engaging. You know, how are they bringing in a carbon market rather than an offset market? So putting a price on carbon and then reinvesting it in their economy. And then where do they really need the global support? Well, they have some proposals on that as well. And that's the discussion we're having at the COP this year, is how we move forward on the whole financing piece. And I just think the G20, Brazil has done a very good job this year. They've brought together the finance track and the climate track together in a task force, because we speak different languages. We don't talk enough to each other, and I think they've really worked to bring those things together and get quite a sophisticated approach of, okay, if you want to scale up renewables, what do you need? If you want to do restoration of nature, what do you need? How do you make it so that it's much more affordable? Agree, that's needed. And I think breaking through those bottlenecks, bringing in the risks through the supply chains in ways that private banks need to be looking at more seriously. All those things, I think, are needed.
I want to come to COP29, 30 and G20, but first we have an audience question from BGD Young Voices. Can we have that?
Well, does it work? Yeah, thank you. My name is Gabor, originally from Hungary, and I'm an MBA student here at the ESMT. Ms. Morgan raised a thought on the skilled labor and why we're at the school. I'm interested in your thoughts as business leaders, thought leaders in the green talent shortage problem. First on this, and second, if there is such, then how do we solve it, and how do the public and private players work together on solving this?
I can start, but sitting here with experts. I mean, I think, so great question. I'll look at you while if I may, while I'm talking, so that I can answer you. I think it happens on many different levels, and I think part of it is actually everything from looking at our vocational education around the world and making sure that that these skills that are needed for the green transition are in the curriculum. It's something that we're working on with South African vocational colleges, right, to bring that in into the training itself. I think there's also, mentioned these national climate plans, actually making the modeling on, okay, if you're going for 80% renewables by 2030, if you want to have a circular economy, then what are the skills that you actually need? And then looking at how you bring that in your all-of-government approach into your education system. And then I think there's a big role also of the private sector. I know often in Davos, there's conversations with companies about how they, Salesforce, various companies are actually trying to see how they can be matchmaking around the world. I think that'll be a discussion at this year's COP, but I know for Brazil it'll be a very big priority. And I think we need to be much more systemic about it. In Germany, I think you have companies that are working internationally, and because of the dual system that we have here, that's something that we're implementing in other countries, but it's a gap. It's one that's been identified by the IEA and IRENA, and I think we need much more profile for it.
May I add something
Please.
to you? Just one thought and one concrete example of yesterday, in fact. Thought is the following. When you look at the universities in many parts of the world, you see that the enrollment of the young students in the clean energy, new technologies is increasing, and for traditional energy sources is decreasing. This is number one. Number two, which I think is important, at least for me as the head of the IEA, we are getting, this is a lot of new stuff from the traditional energy companies to IEA, which surprises me because this Friday, this Monday, yesterday, I talked with one of them. Yeah, why did you come to IEA? It's a bizarre question to ask after they come, but because her salary is cut by 1/3. Why do you cut your salary? And said, I want to do something which I believe is good for everybody. So this is really, I am really, I thought this type of thoughts or motivations are gone. I was very happy and encouraged to hear that this company that she was working is paying much more than we are paying, and our contracts are much shorter term. But we are a great organization, by the way, if you apply, you can apply. So this is another driver. I think people are seeing where they work. Does it make the world a better place or not? Is it also a criteria for choosing the future profession?
And maybe if I can pick in, I think it's a brilliant question, and I think it's something I personally believe very strongly in. 20 years ago, we didn't have a lot of education in universities or other that were really pinpointed at energy or the energy transition. You see this growing. I think as companies, we can do a lot more. We have set up MBA programs. We have done from Japan acquisition in Europe, because you see that the capabilities for the energy transition are still mostly focused in Europe, because a lot of that build-up over the last 10 years of that expertise and that experience has developed over here. But for us, this acquisition was also to cross those borders. So we have set up programs where we're sending multiple young people to Europe and to the US to train and work together with other people, and also cross-pollinate, sending people from Europe to regions in Asia and to regions in Japan. It's also about supporting women to go into STEM. Like, I feel very strongly about that. 20 years ago, nobody told me that I could be an engineer. Now I would push everybody to at least try, if you would want to, of course. But there's a lot of things we can do. I think there's a lot that can be done on the regulatory side, but I think a lot of the companies are driving this. And we see at JERA, because we're the biggest utility in Japan, we get an influx of, I think, about 200 young graduates every year that join the company, and they usually stay for the rest of their lives. That's how the system works. And every time that these new graduates start, I do lunches and I meet with them and I ask them the question, why did you join JERA? And a lot of these young people say, it's because you were the first company in Japan to push to go for decarbonization by 2050. They really believe in this, and it's a real attraction point as well. So we also have to own up to that in a sense.
It comes back to the comment you made, right, Jennifer? Putting people at the center. I think at the end of it, if that's achieved. If there are any other questions from the audience, please raise your hand.
There's a lady there.
Please.
Too high for me. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the discussion. If you can't tell from my energy, I'm really, really excited by the discussion that the panel has today. So I'm Niken, and I'm a climate change and industrial decarbonization advocate, and I'm also a representative for the Young Voice program from New South Wales, Australia. So the panel agrees that the industrial policy is the key main driver for energy transition, but you also agree that this is a long-term and intergenerational issues that we have to tackle together. However, given the potential for government changes, shifting of regulation, and therefore potential risk of policy reversals, how do we make sure that we have the right change management in place across this different generation, making sure that, like what Markus said, that we are delivering the short term, but also we are not losing focus on the long-term goal. And this is one of the risks that was raised by the industries as well when I was developing industrial decarbonization for New South Wales in Australia. So what do you think needs to be in place to make sure that policy consistency? Thank you.
I start as a company because we discuss it internally very intensively. The basis for our investment, I mean, we invest 50 billion until 2030. The basis for our investment is that we have a good investment framework and environment. And that in the end starts with a general consensus in society that these investments need to happen. So we need to always look through the next election cycle, because we have, with our investments, lead times of 8 years. So it's always longer than any election cycle. And that is why stability is so important. If you lose trust that there is a general consensus in the society, then you slow down your investments. And everything that governments can do, bipartisan bills in the US and things like that, where you can be sure that the fundamentals of your investment strategy are not shaken by a change in government, are helpful for this transition.
So please, I hope at the end of the day, we are not going to choose clean energy transition democracy. Democracy is very good. I am very happy. It's a slow transition, but a good democracy, rather than the other way around. So I should tell you that to make it clear. Not that you are saying this, but there are some thoughts on that. So this is the problem with the energy world. Is the energy investments and energy, the fleet and everything is they have a long lifetime, as Markus mentioned. In the IT sector, the one telephone we have is 2-3 years of time. But if you build a power plant, it is 40-50 years with you. So therefore, there is a need for a long-term view strategy. And this is extremely important for the governments to lay down the strategy and give the confidence to the investors that they will not make a zigzag here. It is one of the pitfalls of the democracy which we love.
I mean, I think policy frameworks, I mean, they're not necessarily just for 2 years. I mean, if the policies are done well, that it does represent kind of the center of society, right? We've just gone through this in the European Union. The Green Deal is still a center of European policy moving forward in President von der Leyen's commission that she has put forward in the Parliament. And now you see a prioritization on the clean industrial deal to also make sure and work with self-confidence as Europe that we are competing well in the world. I think the other two pieces I would add, one is an accountability mechanism. What are the accountability mechanisms? What are the enforcement mechanisms that can come in? And I think a big piece that often is underestimated is the importance of communication. So I think media around the world covers a lot about the costs, the challenges, the problems, etc. I don't see as many stories about the local startup that's now a billionaire. I don't see a lot of stories about, actually in the United States I see more than in the German media. There was recently, a couple weeks ago, a great story about the challenges in Minnesota of shifting away from a coal plant, the concerns of the community, how the jobs are being transferred, all of these types of things. And therefore I think it behooves all of us who are involved in this field to be communicating, to be not only talking about the facts, which the IEA gives us, and sharing those facts, but also to be working with people and getting those stories out of people. Because oftentimes I think in Germany there is so much happening on the ground, in Europe there is so much happening on the ground, but I don't think people actually know that that's happening and know that the jobs that are being created also in small, medium-sized enterprises are that big. So I would add in communications as part of the implementation strategy. You can't just do the law and then go away. No, you have to stay at it.
Yeah, and as a large energy company, you're in this for the long haul. Like, you're in this with a long-term view. Like, as Markus says, governments change, but you want to create value for your shareholders. You want to create value going forward. So you move at a specific speed, and everything is cyclical. Everything will change. The economy will change, like the market dynamics will change, but you still need to keep a course and be flexible on how to get there. And you need to bring people with you. I see that a lot with a lot of the young people as well. You need to create a storyline that people are happy to support and that people are happy to invest in as well. And what you said is so true. I think it was last week I was at the Wind Europe fair in Hamburg, and there was also a lot of discussion about it's so difficult for the energy sector now, and it's so difficult for the renewable sector. And yes, that is all absolutely true, but you also have to stay positive, I think, and celebrate your small wins. And I think that also brings in people and brings in more people that want to drive the change and want to drive the energy transition and try to invent new things or think outside of the box or be innovative. Because every small win of every project that you realize somewhere in the world can create a spark for somebody else to try and push forward on it.
Of course. In the topic of political cycles, obviously we've got important elections coming up in November, and not only the US is the largest economy in the world, but we've had references to the IRA, and as a very successful implementation of policy, it is an industrial policy. Also, of course, we've got the history with the Paris Agreement. So do we think election outcome in the US is going to have an impact in the way we think energy transition? Do you think of this or another cycle? Anyone?
Let's refer to what Fatih said, that we all love democracy. So,
exactly. Thank you very much.
Let's look through it. And in the end, of course, policies matter, especially when it comes to long-term investment frameworks. But what is the determining factor behind it? It's technology. And that's going back to the beginning of the discussion. What is actually the cheapest source of energy in the future? It is renewables, it's not fossil. And of course, demand. What do people want? And already today we see significant buying activity also from the corporate sector in the US for green energy. There is no obligation. They have no obligation to do that, but they still do it. So when I look at the demand side and the technology side, I'm optimistic that with another point of view now, maybe very short-term political measures are just noise, but in the end, technology and what the consumers want will determine what's going to happen.
I look at the numbers all the time, and then I look at more in the US, the poll numbers, what's happening in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin. I now learn all the counties in Pennsylvania. I didn't know anything about that, so this is to understand what is going on, to make something. But I agree with Markus. I don't know, even if there was a government who didn't believe in the clean energy or environmental sensitivities, I would be very surprised at the end of the day if United States, the economy, would change its mind to leave the competition with China and Europe for the next chapter of the global economy, which is the clean energy manufacturing, where the jobs are, where the exports are.
I can just say from my travels that we have a clean economy bridge with Germany and the United States on the subnational level. I was recently in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. They are now saying we're no longer the Bible Belt, we're the battery belt, right? And those jobs that are coming and the investment that is coming and the opportunities that are coming and the growth that is coming to those states, I think those governors are pretty committed to moving forward and seeing the benefits of it. So I think I agree. I think that piece of it is shifting, and that's part of this political economy that shifts over time. Not fast enough yet, but it's moving, I mean, in the renewable side of things. And I think that is quite important. I think obviously we're wide-eyed about different implications. I think I can just say, having been in New York last week and all the conversations I have around the world, there is no doubt that every other country, if there were to be a repeat of the first Trump administration of withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, then the world went forward and implemented, and I think even more so now, I feel that determination, noting the difficulty, noting the challenges, not being naive about it, but also not being naive, as I said at the beginning, about the impacts that people are experiencing in their countries. We had a session last week with small island states. And that's, that's small islands, that's not North Carolina that has just been hit heavily by that storm. So I think those factors shake it up a bit. Lots of uncertainty that will come in, but I think the economics all around will keep driving that forward and through.
Any thoughts on it, Nathalie?
Well, I think that last thing you said was really interesting. When I went to COP, I ended up sitting on a plane next to the King of Tonga. And it was a really fascinating man, and we were talking to each other about COP, etc., and I didn't know at first who this person was. And he was saying, yes, and I feel very strongly about this, and I really want to go here, because in 50 years' time, where I live, it's not going to exist anymore. And I said, what do you mean? It's the reality where people live in that is very, very different. Like, we're here, and we don't have any hurricanes in Europe, and you see what's going on in Florida. I have friends who live in Florida. But this has always, I will always remember this moment, because it was like such an aha moment for me, where this person said, look, I know my island is sinking, but I'm going to fight for it anyway. And it was very powerful.
Maybe a few minutes on COP29, because obviously it's ahead of us, it's a couple of weeks. What would be a success of this COP29? Because in COP28, you know, there was a lot of thoughts as to what could be achieved, etc. How do you all think of COP29? I'm assuming as participants in it, potentially from a framework perspective and results perspective.
Now, COP28 was very successful, as you rightly mentioned. There were concrete outcomes, and it provided a roadmap for the, at least for the global energy sector, what needs to happen, what doesn't need to happen. What needs to happen was, as IEA has suggested, tripling the renewable capacity, doubling the energy efficiency, reducing methane, and transitioning away from fossil fuels. It is more than 200 countries signed up. This is excellent. So what I would expect from COP29 is how these targets are going to implement it. What are the implementation? For example, if I give you one example, three times the renewable capacity increase doesn't mean 3 times the renewable generation increase, because you can have the power plant, but to bring the power plant, the power produced there to the homes or the industries, you need grids. We are lacking of grids today. So that it's important that the grids is mentioned in the COP29. The battery storage is, for me, one of the most important technologies we have to deal with, and an ambition, and those enablers of the COP28 targets should have an emphasis there. And perhaps the main issue, or another main issue, is the next financial support for the emerging and developing countries. There is a discussion going there. I am only worried about one thing. COP28 was very successful, and if we have too high expectations from COP29, and if it is not successful, as Jennifer mentioned in the communication side, there are people who are eager to celebrate every single bump on the road to clean energy transition. They will try to get the upper end. So therefore, I don't want to put the expectations too high. I hope there will be solid, good outcomes. And this will, the year after, it will go to, after Baku, hopefully successful meeting, it will go to Brazil, where I expect that the emerging countries' concerns will be heard in large terms.
I mean, you can be assured Germany and the EU will be working very hard to make sure we have very solid, ambitious, and fair outcomes in 2 areas, I think, to highlight. You mentioned both of them. One is, okay, we have these goals. How are they being implemented? What can we be doing multilaterally in order to be moving those forward? And there are some, you'd say, Maschinenraum, like engine room kind of negotiations that don't sound very exciting, but they're quite essential about how countries can work together. Whether in their next national climate plans, they put their tripling, their doubling, and their transitioning away from fossil fuels in there. And what initiatives are there on grids, et cetera. So really being able to say, look, the world was serious, we're moving forward on implementing what we found last year. And And actually, and the IAA and is doing work on this, tracking where countries are so that there can be some accountability of who's doing what moving forward. The second is finance. And this is the year, I think, where there is an opportunity to get this more right. You know, in Copenhagen, the developed countries agreed to fund $100 billion by 2025, yes, or 2020 rather. That was achieved now 2 years later. But that discussion was about this $100 billion. We know it's about so much more than that. So what we're really looking to do is to create a multi-layered approach, a new framework for finance, for climate, where yes, you have that public finance question, which I'll come back to, but then you also look at how can guarantees in private sector be leveraged, how can private sector be leveraged more through guarantees and other instruments? International financial sector reforms. How can we accelerate those? How do we deal with the debt crisis? Because many of these countries don't have the fiscal space to be doing anything. So you can see these, what innovative mechanisms can we be using to raise the funds for loss and damage, which is happening around the world. So kind of you can almost see it like an onion, leading out to a global investment goal of where we need to be getting to. At that core, though, you know, we need to have those public funds, which is a very challenging debate. And while the European Union is ready to continue to take the lead on that, we are also looking for countries that have grown tremendously since 1992 or have long historical emissions to also make a contribution into that so that we can be shifting that number that you said, that 85%. These funds need to be moving into developing countries. And that's a big outcome. We will work hard until the last minute. We will get it. I felt a lot of determination last week in New York. It's not going to be easy. It'll be very tricky and very challenging, but we've got to get there.
Thank you. Any final words on this or any other topic?
No, I mean, as a representative of a corporate, I'm already happy that it will be about implementation and execution.
Yes, yes, of course. Nathalie, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I think as I said, the road forward is very, very complex, and you can celebrate all the bumps or you can celebrate all of the successes. And I think it's mostly focusing on the latter one and joining forces with all of the stakeholders and the investors and the regulatory side to make this happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please welcome our moderator, Karolina Cimoy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I would like to welcome our distinguished guests for this panel. Let me start with Emma Marcegaglia. Marcegaglia, CEO of Marcegaglia Steels. She was also President of Business Europe, President of Coffee Industria, and President of ENI previously. Also honored to welcome the Minister of Finance from Saudi Arabia, Minister Al-Jadaan. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Please take a seat here. Thank you so much. And Germany's Minister of Finance, Minister Lindner, should be here every second. We can definitely start. Minister Lindner will be here any second. We are living in a quite fragmented world. We've been hearing this during this first day of the conference. And one of the aims, as we've heard, of this conference is to build a common ground, or to at least get some ideas or where to find a common ground, right? So, Minister Al-Jadaan, if I may start with you, trade can, of course, help to bring countries together. What is your take on this? How can we get there? How can we find a common ground with trade as an instrument?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me, and for the institution, for Germany to hosting this actually very timely dialogue. And the key theme is actually telling, and it possibly answers your question of really building on common grounds. First of all, I am not pessimistic. Hello, Your Excellency.
Minister Lindner, welcome.
Hello, very nice to meet you.
Good to see you. Pleasure. So building, I mean, the theme of this dialogue is actually timely, building on common grounds. I am not pessimistic, to be honest. I am always an optimist. And I think ultimately we will find our way. But we need just to recognize that there are basic root causes for this, which is, we heard it in the first session, and I would repeat it in brief, which is basically there is a loss of trust within nations, and nations who actually had, over the last 3-4 decades, developed and grew. A lot of them neglected part of their society. I mean, the fact is it was not really an equal growth within societies. That then called for these segments of society who did not really benefit from the growth to call for politicians to do something about it. You know, for example, bring back industries into countries, as we have seen in the US and other parts of the world. But also it caused significant distrust within countries. And as you know, this started basically very clearly during the pandemic, when there was a big scramble around basic health needs, vaccines, etc., where people saw very clearly that countries are closing on themselves and trying just to protect their own people, rather than possibly allowing the supply chain to help other nations at the same time. The last point, I think, which is clearly is a lot of politics came in also. So the war between Russia and Ukraine, the Middle East war, and there are a lot of other really boiling situations around the world that has also caused that largely mistrust between nations. What does that do? People try to close on themselves, try to be independent, and as we have heard earlier in the morning, you get into the independence trap, which is actually causing inflation, largely causing significant inefficiencies in economies, and depriving particularly low-income countries from technologies, innovations, and support that they need as we are today.
Yeah. Trust is key, definitely, and especially for the private sector, of course. And your country is doing really well in the 9-all GDP. It grew by 3.8%, and it's expected to grow even more this year. Now, how are you building this trust with the private sector? Is there a secret recipe you would like to share with us?
Well, there are multiple ways. And I've been talking about this a lot, actually. Not only for Saudi Arabia, but I can give you the example of Saudi Arabia. What do you need really for sustainable growth? You need long-term plans, clearly communicated, with policy positions that are stable, predictable. Private sector does not like changes too much and too high political risk, if I may say. So stable long-term plans that are communicated very clearly is one. Second is public investment that catalyzes private investment. And that is really key. Three is public-private partnerships, particularly in infrastructure, where the need of infrastructure is growing too high and there is limited public money. So you could actually catalyze a lot of private money through public-private partnership. And then, basically, you need to mobilize your nation. What happened in Saudi Arabia is a communication of Saudi Vision 2030 was made very clearly by a very ambitious leadership who are committed to this long-term plan, mobilize the nation with it. If you go into Saudi Arabia today, compared to what it was only 7 years ago, it's a different nation.
Minister Lindner, he mentioned 4 important points: long-term plans, public investments, integrating the private sector, PPPs, and mobilizing the nation. Is that something we're doing in Germany?
I can continue where my friend Mohammed has just stopped. Well, the German challenge is to rebuild competitiveness. We have been losing competitiveness for more than a decade. We were ranked 6th in the global comparison, and now we are at 24th. And so we have to focus on supply-side measures, which means labor market, corporate taxation, bureaucratic burden, and the cost of energy. Our government has just presented a growth initiative which aims for improving these supply-side factors. Furthermore, we have started to invest in our infrastructure on an all-time high. So it's about 80 billion euros next year for grids, for the roads, for the digital grids. And so we are combining, mobilizing the private sector through social market policies with strengthening the public sector, and both combined will hopefully very soon bring back economic success to Germany. Because the turnaround potential in our country is very high, given our SMEs, intellectual property, private capital, which is available here. So we have very, very good starting conditions, but we need a turnaround.
How can you ensure, though, that the government will not only manage the risks, but also benefit from the returns? And is the private sector reacting to the stimulus you started?
Yes, the private sector is reacting. Just to give you an example, I've asked my team in the Ministry of Finance, why are insurances, for example, in Germany, investing less in asset classes like venture capital or private equity compared to France under the same European conditions and frameworks? And then we recognize there are some specific German obstacles, and we are about to remove them. I'm drawing a bill for a second future, financing the future law. And given our plan to improve the framework conditions, for example, for insurances and pension systems, the private sector has committed themselves to invest 12 billion euros more in the asset class of venture capital to 2030. So, and what I want to explain is, you ask, well, how can the public sector benefit?
Yeah.
Behind your question is the idea of paying more subsidies to the private sector. And I'm not in favor of that. I want to improve the conditions in a way that private capital can finance private projects with benefit for all of us.
One of the obstacles, though, is bureaucracy.
Of course.
We were also talking about that.
Yeah.
How can you solve that problem in Germany? Germany is well known for its bureaucratic jungle.
Yes, but just today our Normenkontrollrat, which evaluates the development of the bureaucratic burden, has published its latest report. And I'm proud to say the German Ministry of Finance is leading in reducing the bureaucratic burden.
That's good.
And from all ministries. And so I'm an example for the colleagues in cabinet, one time at least. And the bureaucratic burden coming from domestic policies is at the lowest level since 2012. Our problem is Brussels, frankly. Most of the bureaucratic obstacles are introduced by the European Commission. And, well, we constantly try to convince them that Green Deal must not mean to intervene in every business decision, but preparing elegant frameworks like the European emission trading system, given carbon dioxide a price and letting the market intelligence and innovative people find the proper solutions to reduce our carbon dioxide footprint.
Emma Marcegaglia, you come from the private sector as a CEO. Do you feel motivated by the ideas that we've heard from the ministers? Would you be motivated, stimulated to invest either in Germany or in Saudi Arabia?
Well, it's difficult to say in front of the ministers, but
no, we're not being diplomatic here, are we?
No. First of all, let me say that I agree with what they're saying, this recipe that they said. First of all, the minister said that you need a clear vision. And I read, of course, Vision 2030. I'm also, thinking to invest in the steel business, and there could be a good opportunity there. So a clear vision of what we need, and we have it there. In Europe, I don't know Germany so well. I knew Europe very well. I know Europe well. I know also Germany a bit. I don't think there is this clear view because, for example, let's take the example of the Green Deal. The Green Deal, decarbonization is needed, no doubt of that. And we think also as business, we have a very important role to play. But the way it has been shaped in Europe is not the right way to do it because it's very regulatory driven. You don't put at the attention the technological neutrality. Here we are we have one of the most difficult challenges ever, because if you look at the previous industrial revolution, you always add something. Here you have to cut something or to reshape something, so it's very difficult. So you have to put technological neutrality. You have to deal with a cost of energy that in Europe is much higher than in US. Of course, I don't want to to say what is the cost of energy in Saudi Arabia, because zero, right? It's more or less zero. So we are very jealous of that. But I think the way, for example, in this case, Europe is facing the decarbonization, not the right one. Okay, cost of energy. Another example, we all know, and so I go to the second part, which is the regulatory framework, which is another problem in Europe, in Germany, in Italy. Just an example. We all know that we need to invest strongly in renewables. I'm trying to make an investment as my company in photovoltaic. It takes at least 2 years to have, the authorization from the local authorities, and then at least 3-4 years to have the connection to the grid. in Europe, we don't have the grid because people, we don't invest enough. And then there is this NIMBY things where, you know, if you have to make a grid from, I don't know, from south of Italy to the north of Italy, it's a problem. Huh? So, but it cannot take 6 years to make an investment. Or another example, we are all talking about AI. No? AI is very important. In my opinion, AI could really enhance productivity in Europe. Think about also the small, medium enterprise. Think about some sectors like pharma or other, but even in my sector, in steel. But the idea to have a kind of AI Act in Europe before the others are doing things, which has always this kind of precautionary idea. So we regulate before because we are afraid of the risks that will come after, will kill innovation. Yeah. So just to say that we need to do that. And the third point, which maybe I'm not completely aligned if you allow me, I think we need the huge investments. You know, the drug reports, but no, it's not the drug reports. The IMF are talking about, if we talk about the decarbonization, the AI revolution, and also the defense, we need a lot of money, 800 billion euro additional. So I think I'm totally in line that the real point has to come from private sector, no doubt on that. But I think on some specific part, maybe public investment, and this is, for example, a position of all business Europe, it's not only the Italian companies, also the Nordic companies, on some specific things, connectivity, infrastructure, AI, to have some targeted higher public investment at the European level, not a Italian level, German level, because we need to have the single market, can trigger new investments and can support where maybe the market is failing. So just in that case, I think, but and the finish, I think we need a real capital market union. Yeah. Because if you want to have more investments from the private, we need a capital market union, we need a banking union. So I think the position of Germany is very important.
And Minister Ligna has a lot to say on that, I guess.
I think we need a lot of things. What I heard here is good. Yeah. The real thing is to execute what we need, because I think time is an essence, and we cannot just stay like we are. We really need to see improvement. I'm not talking about South yet. The improvements are already there in South.
There's a lot on what Emma Marcegaglia has said on this bureaucracy, seeing risks instead of opportunities. What do you have to say on that?
I share the main approach. I recently met a CEO from a major technology company coming from the US. And she told me, well, the difference between the US and Europe is the following. We want to innovate technology. You want to regulate technology. Mm-hmm. And so we are specialized in avoiding any risk. But this means we are minimizing our opportunities for further growth, and we limit the speed of progress. When it comes to capital markets union, I'm the biggest supporter of the idea. Compared to the US, we don't have a lack of public sector money. We have a lack of a capital market which is able to finance ventures and growth in the private sector, because, well, it's split into 28 capital markets. Yes. And given the fact that in Germany we don't have a pension system with a capital, so there's a lot of room for improvement. When it comes to the public sector, I beg to differ. There is a huge amount of money on the table. I remind you of the program Next Generation EU, up to 800 billion euros. The annual budget of the European Union, it is really large, but the money is spent for old technologies. The money is spent to keep structures in certain member states of the European Union which are not sustainable and not competitive anymore. For example, the amount of money we spend for the agricultural sector. Yeah. So before we raise the budgets, probably financed by more debt, I would like to raise the question whether it's possible not to spend more money, but to spend the money we have better.
Yes, but as you see, it's very difficult, huh? Because then some countries
One has to start.
I know, but
talking about innovation, Vision 2030 is an example for that. How has been your approach on this? How have you been integrating the private sector in Vision 2030? Because you have been one of the brains of this huge project, quite ambitious project.
Two things I wanted just to comment from what I've heard now and connecting it to your question. One is, obviously, this is about a global dialogue. So instead of talking just about Germany or Saudi Arabia or Italy, we also need to recognize that what happens in Germany impacts Italy and impacts Saudi Arabia and vice versa.
Sure.
And therefore, making sure that a global dialogue continues through multilateral institutions and maintaining and protecting multilateral institutions as a forum for adversaries even to have a proper place to discuss their issues and but a lot of them are common issues that they need to discuss and agree. One of them is technology. And I think we all recognize that without a very clear environment that supports innovation and technology and then sharing information and technologies, particularly with low-income countries and some of the emerging markets, you cannot have prosperity in the world. So being too protectionist and being selfish, if I may use the word widely, is not actually in your best interest as a nation. Because what happens in other nations will impact you.
Sure, this is why we're trying to find
exactly
common ground.
Just going back,
also, if possible.
Absolutely, and
I know.
we do continuously. And in Saudi, we focused on that. In Saudi, we said, how are we going to use our own competitive advantage in not only achieving our own interests, but also advancing the interests of other nations? In AI, for example, we looked way in advance of the current discussion of what is our position in AI? How are we going to contribute in the value chain of AI? And I can tell you, obviously, we are not the most advanced country in semiconductors, okay? So we don't have that competitive advantage now, but we would like at least to have some advancement. But definitely we have a competitive advantage in energy. And the problem is we cannot export our energy to Germany directly. So we need to think how we are going to do that. One of them is to say German AI companies and technology companies can actually set up their business in Saudi Arabia near a very reasonably priced energy, where there are multiple energy sources, not only fossil fuel, there is the fossil fuel, and there's renewables, and we have very ambitious plans in our electricity to achieve 50% renewable by 2030, and we are actually on the way to achieving that. So we have the energy, we have the land. You need a lot of land that is suitable for solar farms. And we have obviously the cheapest, as we speak now, we have the cheapest renewable energy produced by the private sector. So if you do that and say to Germany and the US and Europe and Asia, we will give you actually sovereign rights over your own data centers, so as if it is in Germany or in the US, then you are actually creating bridges. You are allowing other countries to use your competitive advantage, but also you are using their competitive advantage to benefit your own economy. That kind of sharing is important.
I'm not sure if all German AI companies should move to Saudi Arabia, but I'm in favor of the idea of division of labor and production and to widen the horizon. With your cheap renewables, you are capable to produce green hydrogen and synthetic fuels to a competitive price. And this can really make the transformation of our economy and the mobility sector much easier if we would produce that domestically. And to add on this, I think you're completely right. We have to look at the influence of the global situation for our economic well-being, because it's closely connected. We can talk about framework conditions in Germany, but in our key industry sectors, we are so connected to the global development. We can do whatever we want domestically. It wouldn't make any change. For example, at the moment, we have this difficult situation of German car manufacturers. And in domestic politics, the idea is presented, okay, we can pay subsidies for customers who want to buy an electrified car. And this is ridiculous, because the problem of our car manufacturers at the moment is the risk of a tariff conflict with People's Republic of China. So we mustn't think about subsidies by the taxpayer, but reducing the geo-economical tension to China. It's a very, very sensitive topic. And by the way, on the European level, decisions will be made on Friday, and I hope in the right direction, to de-escalate this risk of a potential trade conflict with China in the automotive sector.
Can I just comment on this, if I may? Just one quick comment.
Sure.
This is actually a very good example. So we are mobilizing the global leadership, the global societies around climate change and the need really to deal with climate change. And then suddenly we find that there is a country that is actually getting more advanced than us in producing cheap climate change combating technologies, including batteries, EVs, etc. And we didn't like that. So it's not anymore the climate change challenge now, it is national challenge. So I think we can allow China to do what their competitive advantage allowing them to do, and in Europe we could do what our competitive advantage allow us to do, and the same in Saudi Arabia or Latin America. So we just need to make sure that our key priorities, like climate change, is not being impacted negatively by political agendas. I'll stop.
May I say
However,
something?
the
Because
political,
I think it's very important.
And the legal framework.
Yeah, this point is very important, I think, because you know, I agree on the fact that I'm totally against war trade that are detrimental for all of us. But I think what happened in the last decades shows that we have been a little bit naive in Germany, in Europe, everywhere, because our dependence on China, or first on Russian gas. No? It was, well, what is the cheapest gas in the world? Russia. Let's go and buy only gas from Russia, not diversification, nothing. Where is the cheapest way to buy, you know, battery? In China. Let's do it there. So at the end, after COVID and after the war, we realized that we were very weak because all our value chain with the COVID and then with the war were completely, you know, broken. So I think in this new era, we have to strike a new balance, a better balance between kind of national security, which is needed because on some points we have to be autonomy. We cannot depend completely on raw materials coming from other parts, on technology coming only from one part of the world. But on the other hand, I agree that we have to keep the market opens. Because otherwise, if everybody make himself all the needs of your supply chain, the costs are very high, you know, you close everything. At the end, also democracy could be here. So I think we need to strike a new balance between fair and free trade, because, you know, China is fine, but on China, sometimes you see state-owned company with a lot of subsidies that come to Europe and disrupt all the market. So we need to have a fair market, a fair trade, where if there are dumping, you use the instruments, but where you are not against China and export because are just coming from export. So a good balance between some national security, but trade, but fair trade that has to continue and to be open. Otherwise, Europe, which is a big exporter, will at the end have a big hit on its capacity to grow.
Still building the bridges. Before we open the floor for questions from the audience, I would like to have a quick round on how to deal with the mentality also in the different countries. It goes, of course, also with demographics. But do we have the society in Germany to approach this topic, innovation and transformation, in the same dynamic that, for example, Saudi Arabia is having?
There is further room for improvement in Germany. We are coming from a decade with a stable growth, very low interest rate, and well, we were able to benefit from what has been built in the decades before. And now we have to speed up. We need to introduce kind of a start-up mentality in our society.
How do you do that?
As a whole. Well, leading by example. And there is a need for a mentality change. If people think, well, the best for their personal life is working only 4 days a week, this has an influence for the mentality of an economy as a whole. And so we have to change this, and I'm thinking we are making progress there. And we need a realistic approach. I fear, when it comes to international cooperation, the German society partly is not realistic. We want to make choices on the global level with whom we want to cooperate because all our values, our way of life is shared. A realistic approach means we have to deal even with very difficult trade partners. We have to deal with them and to find common ground.
Bridges. Yes.
We need to find bridges and common ground. I think we have, for example, the both of us, a very open discussion about global policy developments and global tension, but there's common ground, and we need this common ground. If Germany would only want to deal and to trade with those who completely share our way of life, we even had a problem with Spain.
Yes.
Even with Spain. And so I suggest a more realistic approach.
And that would probably also build trust. Do you agree, Minister Al-Yadan?
I do, and I think it is, in my opinion, there are actually a lot of common grounds that we can build on than what we think. There are, between Saudi and Germany, there are a lot of common grounds that we can bilaterally build on, but also multilaterally. I mean, it's in German and Europe interest to have a stable Africa. Africa is our neighbor, and we can work together on that. It's in our interest to make sure that the IMF and the World Bank are strengthened and operating effectively and are able to help the membership. That's a common ground that we are actually working on regularly. The same with in the G20, where we are both members. There are a lot of common grounds there that we can work on and build on. People talk in the media and obviously are in the media, so always about the negative issues because that's what really make headlines. But there are a lot of good things around the world that we need to build on rather than focusing on the difficult ones.
Maybe if I may, I totally agree. Maybe we can also add the fact that in this, when we have this challenge in front of us, so difficult, so deep, it's very important that the governments, support themselves, that they have a conversation. But also I think it's very important to have a conversation between corporates, public and private. Some of the issue, things about AI, for example, understanding how AI will develop, I think it's very important also to have a very deep and strong conversation with companies who are developing this innovation. So I think governments, for sure, among them, but also corporates with governments to try to understand how to, to shape a new future where there is more optimism and where we can try to solve the problems together.
And a common ground between governments could also create trust for the private sector, right?
Sure, for sure.
I would like to open the floor for questions. Please give me a sign if you have a question. If not, I have a bunch of questions more. I was told that the young voices prepared something. Please go ahead. The students.
So let's try it like that. Hello, my name is Patrick. Happy to have you here. I'm working on electrification of trucks and also doing an online MBA as a part-time. And we, as a cohort of almost 40 young people, have decided on a quite interesting question about what is the role between private and public investments. And in this case, we thought about private investment is quite necessarily very important to make this industrial transformation happening. But how do you ensure that, on the other hand, still there's enough public funding, public investment available, besides keeping black zero, schwarz null, having enough for that, for investments in infrastructure, in education, and then also for the long term, ensuring that we combat the demographic challenges that we have by ensuring that people who want to have children are able to afford them, and they are not deciding against children for financial reasons. So affordable living, affordable housing, how do we ensure that on the other side, from a public perspective? And this goes for mostly for Mr. Lindner and for the Saudi Arabian perspective.
Well, unfortunately, we don't aim for a schwarze Null. The public deficit is 50 billion euros of new debt this year and next year. We are far away from schwarze Null, which was the idea of the last decade, in which had been invested too little in our infrastructure. Coming to your question, I think the role for the public sector is enabling development through investing in infrastructure. Electrified trucks and cars needs a charging infrastructure, and so we are funding this charging infrastructure in public-private partnership models, and I think this is a way forward we can do. On a more broader perspective, we are talking about the global perspective of economic well-being, more growth and trust. And I'm convinced geo-economical stability is key for transition, innovation and growth. And I fear there are risks for the geo-economical stability given the debt distressed situation in low-income countries, especially in Africa. And I'm very polite when I say that I'm concerned about the budget development in France and Italy. And Germany has to lead by example. We have European fiscal rules. We have strengthened them. They are more reliable. They lead to lower deficits and debt to GDP ratios in the European Union. And among member states, we have to lead by example. We have to be compliant with the European fiscal rules. And many domestic German observers are surprised when I constantly keep saying the constitutional debt break of Germany leads almost to the same results than the European fiscal rules. So you could beam me as finance minister away. You could find a 2/3 majority in parliament to get rid of our constitutional debt brake. You had to break European rules to allow more debt in Germany. And this is why I ask us to take into account spending better than more on the European level and domestically. I need one afternoon to find billions of euros more for public sector investment in infrastructure. I need one afternoon and a majority in parliament for myself. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Are there more questions from the audience? Yes, we have a question over there, please. We have a microphone.
Then you allow me to say something about Italian public debt.
We can get back to that during the break.
Super bonus.
Please.
Yeah, Maximilian Hoffmann, I'm president at the Foreign Council on Economic Relations. My question goes to Mr. Al-Shadan. It's not really, or it's not fitting really into finance, but it's part of this. My question goes about BRICS Plus. So what do I expect within the next 5 years from BRICS Plus, as well as also what is the role of Iran under this umbrella? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll comment just on the previous question and then I'll answer this. I think to me, I mean, just because this is actually a very important question for a lot of people, the government role is not just to throw money at a problem, okay? Because the government role, if you are expecting money to be thrown at a problem, then you need to think about where is the source of that money. I think the government role is to try and use its key tools, which is policies, to help private sector and society at large. And I can talk about partnerships, I can talk about ease of doing business, I can talk about competitiveness, and His Excellency spoke about this. I can also talk about what kind of jobs are we creating in the economy and how can we direct our policies to create a better jobs for people, but not only job, but business opportunities for SMEs, for example, and entrepreneurs. These are very critical. It will allow him to get married and have 3, 4 children, if you have the right job, the right quality job, or the right business. So instead of focusing on sources, basically sourcing money through tax or debt, you could largely do policies that will enlarge the economy, which then provide opportunities for business, provide opportunities for entrepreneurs, and even enlarge your tax part of that economy.
I would say there's a common ground in this sense here.
In relation to BRICS, and I assume the question is directed to me because we were invited to join BRICS. We have not actually joined BRICS. We've been invited and we are considering that invitation. But let me actually take BRICS and take OPEC, okay, as an example, and take possibly other forums where we managed, whether it is in BRICS, they managed, they have adversaries within BRICS, India, China, and countries that have possibly common grounds, but they have differences, but they focused on their common ground. The same with OPEC, where we have countries who are in conflict. Saudi and Iran, for example, has been in conflict, but they managed to isolate that political side of their differences and just focused on their common grounds. And my call within this really dialogue is the more we focus on common ground within multilateral institutions or regional institutions, the more we are likely to actually do better for our nation and for the global economy.
Does that answer your question?
We have one more question from a young voice.
Hi, my name is Edward Chan, coming from UC Berkeley. Another question that we had come up with in our cohort is around the ecosystem of startups. So both the risk-taking entrepreneur and the talent of engineers required for an ecosystem of innovation. How might you emulate the successes of Bangalore, Silicon Valley, Shenzhen, and do it in your respective countries, but also in general? And is there any opportunity for collaboration?
Can I just go very quickly? I think this is a fantastic question. Talents are very key. And I think there are advantages in countries like in Saudi Arabia, where about 70% of our population are below 35. And we have taken the technology advancement very seriously within our population. And so you will find that we rank, I think, 5th globally on the young population awareness and ability and savviness in technology. This is very critical, and it is very critical to attract technology companies. It is very, very, very critical for innovation. But then that alone is not enough. So that, and then you need to collaborate. You need to bring technology companies, partner with them. We invested. And this is one thing that possibly other countries should do, is you will need to have some form of sovereign wealth fund that is commercially driven, but also helps you in your economic development objective. So that they can co-invest in venture capital. Commercially, they are making money, but also focusing on what really matters and what is your national interest needs in collaboration with global institutions. I'll stop there.
In Germany, the situation is a bit different, isn't it?
It is a bit different, and so I don't want to comment on Saudi, but for Germany, my perspective is there is a connection between talent, technology, and tolerance. Or in other words, you cannot split economic freedom from societal liberties. And given the German situation, to keep Germany attractive for talents to immigrate in our labor market, we have to overcome the rise of right-wing populism. This is really an economical risk for our development, that talents could probably no longer feel invited to the German labor market due to the rise of this populist movements.
Yeah. More questions from the audience? I don't see any. Oh, one more, and then we'll get to the closing remarks, because this is a very important takeaway for us. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Oliver Bilal from Invesco. My question goes to Mr. Lindner. We have now another attempt, due to the Draghi report, to strengthen the EU capital market union. I think this is absolutely key in order to get Europe more competitive. Now it seems still it's going to be debated, no consensus. What can be done to unlock?
I can assure you we are working really intensively on that topic. We've started with a Franco-German roadmap a couple of years now ago, and in the Eurogroup and among member states, we are all sharing the same view. We need progress there. I want to focus on what we can deliver very soon. So to give you an example, it's not possible to agree on one European insolvency law, at least not in my lifespan. Wouldn't be possible. So we made the proposal to introduce a 28th insolvency law as an opt-in option for the private sector. And this will lead to magnetism. All private sector players, they will opt for this 28th insolvency law for their products and services, and this will overcome the deficit of the existing 27 insolvency law. The market for securitizations has to be revitalized, especially for banks, not so important for the German banking sector, but for the Spanish, Italian, and French, even more. We want to introduce a European investment product. And I could add issues of that agenda for the Capital Markets Union, but I will stop with one: reducing the obstacles for IPOs. This would really provide scale-up companies with the funding they need to grow and to get more market share and to enter the global market. So I can assure you there is progress very soon possible. We are working hard on this. It's not the fully flexed capital markets and banking union one can dream of, but it's really a progress we can achieve, and then we can build on that further.
We lost 10 years, right?
Yes, 20 years ago would be the best point in time to start. Today is the second best.
May I say just one thing to the minister, because he talked about debt? Just
sure, address that, and he already, in a way...
Just because I totally agree that France and Italy has to lower the level of debt. No question of that. But what I want to underline, and also probably that will also come from the for the students' question, I think, and also I see this, on my skin. Let's talk, for example, about decarbonization. Okay, so the challenges are so big. And, the need of new investments in, I don't know, hydrogen, green hydrogen is still very costly. So in this situation, hydrogen doesn't exist. You can decarbonize some, for example, the steel sector that are using hydrogen because it's too high. So either we do something all together at the European level, or what will happen, and this is already going on, is that Germany will subsidize their own companies. And the other countries are not doing that. So, in my opinion, if we go like that, the real risk is that either we will go all to invest in Saudi, maybe the minister is happy, or, the risk is that at the end, as you said, the risk is that who has the money will subsidize, and then the single market will be broken. So this doesn't mean that we have to lower debt. I think that we have absolutely to lower the debt.
But the European state aid rules don't allow that every member state does what
they want.
Well, during the COVID, yes, you remember. During the COVID, yes. 70% of the subsidies were coming from Germany.
Yes, but the state aid regime now is not in the pandemic mode. We are back to the regular framework, and I think it's okay. For me, it's okay because it limits the ideas what can be subsidized. And when you are mentioning transformation, I'm completely committed to climate neutrality in 2050 in the European Union, of course. But the way to achieve it, we have always to reconsider if we are on the right track, to remove working technologies and to replace them with climate-friendly technologies, using public money and debt for this. This way would not lead to sustainable public finances, because the growth potential is not higher, but the public debt is higher without a higher growth potential of economy, and this leads to debt distress. And my recommendation is let's use the competition of ideas, the best technologies. Your plea was for technology neutrality, and this leads to lower costs of reducing the carbon dioxide footprint. And if we introduce, Mohamed and myself, we are constantly talking about this, if we use the international division of labor, it can be even cheaper. For example, I would like to pay the forestry industry in Brazil to preserve their rainforests and to use this to reduce the German carbon dioxide footprint. And this would be an international cooperation which would help to develop countries like BRIC states, Brazil in that case, and it would reduce the costs of reducing carbon dioxide in Germany and the European Union. So let's find an approach to a global project which uses the global capabilities better than we do now.
Why is this kind of approach not possible now? If you
It is. In the Paris agreement and process, it's integrated, but it's not yet brought to praxis, and we should work on this. All international fora.
Thank you so much. Very briefly, I mean, you in a way already answered this question, but if we could condense this into 2 or 3 points, the 3 most effective incentives you see to mobilize the private sector for innovation and for industrial transformation. We can start with you, Minister Al-Yardan.
Long-term plans,
Long-term
clear
plans.
vision, predictability, fairness. And 3, a very clear policy direction that is communicated. Manpower, talent, we talked about. And that is really critical. You need to make sure that you have the right talent that the private sector need.
Thank you. Strong investment in innovation and AI altogether. The cost of energy is very important. And I would say trade that has to remain open.
Minister Lindner?
Fiscal and political stability is key. In other words, trust and predictability. Uncertainty is the risk for all private businesses, domestically and on the global level. I think the risk of fragmentation of the global economy would lead to losses for all, for us, for others. And then a can-do mentality. I think pessimism, for example, in Germany, limits our ability to change and to introduce new growth perspectives. If we trust we can make it, we can find technologies, we can find solutions for challenges in our societies, then we will be able to deliver. So, can-do mentality.
See more opportunities instead of risks. Thank you so much for this wonderful round with both ministers and Emma Martigali.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.